Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today we're going to be diving into my top 10 fantasy football running backs for the 2022 season. Just a week or so ago, I made a similar episode to this where we did a tiers list, and I grouped these players into, again, like groupings and focused more so on similarities. But today, I'm going to be actually associating a numeric value with each of these top 10 players, and we're going to be talking through some of those differences and why I have certain players ranked ahead of others or under others, depending, obviously, on where they fall on the draft board for today. So, if you guys are new around here, as always, drop down, click that subscribe button, turn the bell on so you're never late for an episode. And if you want the rest of the big picture here to all of my rankings for this 2022 fantasy football season, maybe you're a dynasty player as well, you can get access to all that stuff for heading over to Underdog Fantasy. There's a link in the description of today's episode, and I'll be pinning a comment as well. But go over to Underdog Fantasy, use promo code SFS when you sign up and deposit $10 or more. That'll let you know that I sent you there, and then you're going to get access to all my rankings, all of my draft guides for both redraft and dynasty, as those are created throughout this offseason. There's already a good amount of content in there, but we're currently and progressively infusing more and more stuff into there every single week. So go check out Underdog Fantasy. Again, promo code SFS. There's a link in the description and in the pinned comment section of today's episode. Go check it out. But here's my top 10 RBs for this season. Alrighty, here we go. So we're going to be starting with our number one running back today, making our way towards the number 10 player on my board at the position. There are a couple of names that I really wanted to fit in here, and I'll mention those two players at the end of today's episode. However, they just didn't quite crack my top 10, but that doesn't mean that they can't still be RB1s, obviously, because in 12-team formats, you're still going to have an RB1 be a top 12 player. So I think pretty standard procedure here. Jonathan Taylor is my RB1 for this season. You can see I've put the ADP below their names up on the screen for you guys to check out. He's the 1.1 overall pick, so he is far and away, on average, the first draft selection in your 2022 fantasy football leagues. And the reasoning why and the explanation is simple. He was the RB1 last season. Now, that definitely does not guarantee that he'll finish that way again this year. However, when I look at the skill set, the workload he saw a season ago, the situation, not too much has really changed here for Jonathan Taylor, and I don't have any reason to see an overarching major statistical drop-off heading into this season. Now, the touchdown count was high, so that's always something that you have to consider when you're talking about potential regression for a player. Touchdown regression for the 2020 RB1, Alvin Kamara, who we'll talk about later today, was quite significant the next season. So Jonathan Taylor could see some bumps and bruises in that area of his fantasy football scoring production. But when you talk about the red zone usage he had last season, that's one of the reasons that kept him so high and at this number one position for me. Because, again, despite the fact that you're going to see most likely some TD regression here this season, he still had 92 red zone touches, which was far and away the number one metric at that position group for the 2021 season. And 20 of those 92 carries in the red zone, again, that being from the 20-yard line of opponent territory to the goal line, 20 of those carries were on the goal line. So you're talking about him literally just needing to leap over the line of scrimmage and score a touchdown from very, very short yardage situations. So those are super valuable touches. And another reason that I think that number is not entirely sustainable, but somewhat sustainable, is because Matt Ryan has not been a great an efficient quarterback in the red zone, especially recently in his time with the Falcons. That's been an area of the field that he's struggled to produce, especially for his wide receivers. We've really seen Julio Jones never have elite red zone numbers. Kyle Pitts, a season ago in his rookie year, put up 1,000 yards, but just one TD. Because, again, I think that we can link that back to some of the struggles Matt Ryan has had in this area of the field, and that's why I think that Frank Reich and this coaching staff will lean a little bit more on Jonathan Taylor in between the 20s there. So you've got a fantastic workhorse skill set here, a player who saw 53 targets in the receiving game despite having Nyheim Hines factored into that backfield as kind of their receiving down specialist. Now, Frank Reich did kind of issue the warning that you should draft Nyheim Hines in your fantasy league, so keep a lookout for him, especially in PPR formats. I don't think that he's going to just evaporate JT's touches and opportunities in the passing game, but it could potentially, again, I just want to at least point out things that could be signs of regression for this upcoming season because, let's face it, I love these players. There's a lot of players that I'm very excited about, and you'll hear that when we're talking through them today, but it's not like these are absolute perfect, unbreakable things that are guaranteed to be fantasy football explosions. It's important to be just as equally aware of the red flags and why a player might not work out as it is to be intrigued by their upside and opportunity for the offense. So, again, the other major situational change is obviously we didn't even talk about him yet, but going from Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan. So I think you're getting a more stabilized producer at the quarterback position. Maybe the upside isn't quite as high, but you are getting that guy who I think can be a high level, and I hate to say this about Matty Ice, but he's a high-level game manager. This is a quarterback who is going to get the ball out on time and on target. He's going to make checks at the line of scrimmage and put the Colts in the best situation to succeed, but he doesn't necessarily have that rocket arm or ability outside the pocket to throw footballs downfield like Carson Wentz did. So, and then the O-line, still top 10 offensive line. You can debate, different outlets have their different metrics for rating offensive lines, whether it's, RotoWire or PFF, but they're a top 10 offensive line. I feel very comfortable saying that, especially on the interior, which obviously gives JT a ton of opportunities because he's getting the most of his work done in the rushing department, but again, is a very capable receiving threat as well. Christian McCaffrey is my RB2 here for this season. Now, his ADP is 3.2. That's a typo. It says 3.3 on the screen, but when I just checked it, it was 3.2 at the time of recording this video. He's seeing himself dip downwards a little bit. So, if you go back earlier into this offseason, his ADP was in the range of the second overall pick, but Cooper Kupp has since kind of leapfrogged him, and now you're seeing Christian McCaffrey, who is a much riskier pick again than a Cooper Kupp, because let's face it, with Cooper Kupp, you're expecting fantastic fantasy floor value on a week-to-week basis. Christian McCaffrey may just have the highest upside of anyone at the running back position, but his floor is also excessively low because of the games played that we've seen, just 10 of them over the last 2 years, which is clearly the number one flashing red light in the back of your head when you're thinking about pressing the draft button. Trust me, as much as I love Christian McCaffrey, I panic slightly internally every time just because I have that fear of the worst case scenario. And that's completely fine. If you're drafting Christian McCaffrey, there is a risk involved. It's not like I'm going to sit here and tell you that he's not going to get injured this season, because frankly, we don't know. When you played 3 games in 2020 and 7 in 2021, there's a lot of risk factor into that. And yes, he averaged over 20 points per game in PPR scoring in those contests where he suited up, which is ridiculous. But it's a small sample size. We have seen him finish as an elite running back before. Obviously, he has that dream fantasy skill set with all the volume in the goal line game and the receiving department, being an efficient threat on just simple first and second down runs. He's the total package. He just needs to stay healthy and be out there and on the field. Now, the red flags in the situation are fairly obvious. Sam Darnold is not an elite NFL quarterback, so you can have your questions and your concerns about how high of an offensive ceiling does Carolina really have, but Christian McCaffrey has produced at an elite level in fantasy without those things in the situation before. Even when CMC was doing his best things with Cam Newton, it's not like Cam was necessarily the MVP level player that we saw him at previous markers in his career. So I don't think it's a total deal breaker if Sam Darnold is the QB here, and additionally the offensive line is not very good as well. We just talked about Jonathan Taylor having a top 10 offensive line. I feel very comfortable saying the Panthers have a bottom 10 offensive line despite addressing the position with Ike Ekwonu early in the draft. I think that they need more than just one infused piece of additional help there. So we'll see. With Christian McCaffrey, to me, the skill, the talent, the opportunity, everything is there except for an elite level of offensive production as a whole. This does not pertain to Christian McCaffrey. This is the Panthers offense. And then the other thing being the health, the injuries. It is a scary thing and it's a red flag. But if you're at the second or third draft position, this is probably the best way to go in those two scenarios. But if you want to play things on the safer side, I might just pass on RB altogether and go with Cooper Kupp if he's still there. My RB3 here is Austin Ekeler. So what you're going to notice is an ADP drop from that 3.2 selection with CMC down to the 6.8 here with Austin Ekeler. The reason for that is you've got your Justin Jeffersons and your Jamar Chases going typically, and obviously ADP indicates that they're going a little bit ahead of Austin Ekeler, which again is fine. I used to call Austin Ekeler, at least last season, what I called him was mini McCaffrey. But after seeing what Austin Ekeler gave us last year, I might just have to, switch the roles up a little bit. Maybe McCaffrey can be mini Ekeler here, just in terms of availability. Austin Eckler's been a bit more available, although he did have that hamstring injury during the 2020 season that held him out for a decent amount of games. So obviously what's to like here about Austin Ekeler is just like CMC. The reason I called him mini McCaffrey because they have very comparable skill sets. They're fantastic out of the backfield, catching passes in the receiving game, despite the fact that they are not huge players. They're actually, quite modestly sized running backs. They're getting a lot of goal line volume, a lot of opportunities. Austin Ekeler scored 20 touchdowns in 2021. He is a machine at just finding ways to hit pay dirt. And one of the most intriguing things for me is despite having Mike Williams and Keenan Allen in this offense, Austin Ekeler still commanded a 15% target share in a Justin Herbert-led offense, which obviously gives you phenomenal production upside when you're just talking about that team in a vacuum. So I love everything Austin Ekeler brings to the table. I'm not at all scared off or spooked by the drafting of Isaiah Spiller. To me, that's more of a maybe it's late in the fourth quarter. They want to bring in more of a physical, larger power back to just kind of grind out that last drive. Occasionally in third and short situations, they might want to bring him in, but I don't think he's going to infringe upon Eckler's receiving work. And for the most part, I don't think he's going to touch too much of what Ekeler does on the goal line because we've seen other guys like Joshua Kelly, who's a quite larger back, hasn't really made too much of a dent. And obviously when you're cracking 20 at the touchdown production statistic and metric, you're doing something right, and you're getting very valuable options or touches and opportunities. So love Ekeler. He's my RB3 this season. RB4 is Derrick Henry. His ADP is just a sliver behind. So you can see that the fantasy community right now, again, I should have prefaced this, all ADP is provided by Underdog's Best Ball fantasy format. Again, promo code SFS or the link in the description of today's episode. Still use promo code SFS if you're going to sign up. But you guys can draft with me this season and whatnot. And again, you're going to get all my rankings for redraft and dynasty, some player profiles as well, and the entire sizzlefantasy.com website for free for signing up using promo code SFS. So go do that. But you can see the split and the even nature of the decision-making process out there when your draft values are separated by a tenth of a position here. Clearly, it's about 50-50. So obviously, the things that Derrick Henry was on pace to do last season were completely out of this world prior to the foot injury, which was the first major injury of his career, I want to note. So I am definitely not someone that's going to slap the injury-prone tag on Derrick Henry because that just has not been true to this point in his career. And I think that was more of a volume issue. I mean, he was getting so many touches. He saw, I forget what the 5 stats were, but it was rushing attempts, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, touches per game. There was these 5 metrics that since his rookie season, every single one of those stats climbed every year of his career. And he was about to be, at least statistically, he was on track for back-to-back 2,000-yard seasons. He had in 8 games played, nearly 1,000 yards, and he had north of 24 fantasy points per game, 10 touchdowns, so he was on pace for cracking that 20 TD marker, and he was actually seeing an increased level of volume and opportunity as a pass catcher out of the backfield. So the things that he was doing early last season were just filthy and absolute daggers. No matter how good your opponent did in fantasy, it seemed like whoever had Derrick Henry, as long as he had an average supporting cast just kind of chugging along the way, they were picking up dubs all along last season. And again, if you're getting him at roughly the 7th pick in your draft, I think that's phenomenal value. I will still take him. I'm not scared off, again, by the foot injury. And I think that they're going to be more dependent on him than ever, especially as they're transitioning into a passing game without A.J. Brown and trying to get Traylon Burks set up to be kind of that vertical play-action shot player for this Tennessee passing game. So it's very rare in today's day and age of NFL football you're going to find an offense centered around the running back in the running game, but that's what Tennessee is. They are a smash-mouth, physical football team, and there's not anyone that embodies their identity offensively better than Derrick Henry. My RB5 here is DeAndre Swift of the Detroit Lions. Now you can see a roughly 10 to 11 pick ADP discrepancy between these two players, which indicates that you can get DeAndre Swift. Now, I'm not going to advocate that you reach up into the middle of the first round to go draft a guy like Swift, but we might see his ADP climb throughout the summer. That's not something that just because I have him ranked highly that I'm guaranteeing at all. But it is showing that I can get a player who I love, has a dream fantasy football skill set, and I think brings all the tools to the table to be a top 5 finisher. I can get him in the early to mid-second round of 12-team formats. So that is a smash the draft button every single freaking time for me when he's on the board in the second. I wouldn't mind going receiver early in the first, and then if he's still there, I am more than comfortable, clearly, if he's a top 5 running back in my rankings, having him as the top option on my team. I just think that, in a sense, I won't go as far to say he's more talented than Christian McCaffrey, but I will say that when you talk about CMC and Austin Ekeler kind of having those dream, overpowered fantasy skill sets of being so dominant in the receiving game, I do think DeAndre Swift has more raw talent as a NFL prospect than Austin Ekeler has. So, yes, he's not playing in the Chargers offense. Yes, the infrastructure around him is not nearly as good as it is in LA for an Austin Ekeler, but this dude's got a heck of a ceiling, and I would not be surprised to see him absolutely smash on this ADP just over the 17th pick in the draft. So if we want to talk some question marks, some red flags of Swift, why he may not finish in this top 5 category, you do have the fact that he's only played in 13 games each season. So he played 13 games his rookie year in 2020, 13 games his sophomore season in 2021. And this past year, he did get injured in week 12, and after that, we saw his usage pretty much tank, which I think negatively impacted his fantasy finish and kind of left somewhat of a sour taste in our mouth in terms of how the year ended. But some other positives I want to point out is the fact that he only had 617 rushing yards, and for a team that I think has a top 10 offensive line, I think Detroit's O-line is very underrated. That gives a lot of opportunity for growth and improvement. Now, there's been other running backs like Alvin Kamara, per se, who are these elite-level dominating receiving backs that have never had 1,000-yard rushing season in their career, and I would, at this point, be shocked to see him do that. But the point is that even if he can get you to 800 or 900 yards, that's still statistical growth. We'll see if he can stay healthy. That's more so than he has in his first 2 years. That's something that I don't want to project because we'll talk about Dalvin Cook here in just a minute. And he's someone who has never played more than 14 games. So it's not like it's a given that he's going to play fewer games or more games at this point in time. It's just kind of we're still feeling out DeAndre Swift. But man, that elite fantasy skill set is there. The opportunity to be a dominant pass catcher out of the backfield is very obvious. He had the second leading target share of all running backs last season with 18.4% of Detroit's offensive volume heading his direction. So in the receiving game. So love what he brings to the table here. I am very excited for Swift in 2022. Dalvin Cook, as I just mentioned, his ADP is 10.7 here. So I'm finding myself more often than not at the 11th or 12th pick in my best ball drafts right now, drafting Dalvin Cook. I just think that it's too good to pass on him, and I think that we're having a little bit too much shade in that fantasy fade mentality here for Cook this season. I think that there are definitely players who are being drafted ahead of Cook that should not be. And I think that we're discounting a little bit about what he's done because last season was an average year for Cook, if you will, only 6 touchdowns and didn't have those eye-popping numbers to put him at the most elite level, the highest level of 2021 fantasy football running backs. But he definitely had those weeks, and he definitely passed the eye test. In particular, the game against Pittsburgh, he looked like he had a total different gear than everyone else on the field and was totally blowing those Steelers out of the water and making them look quite silly in that football game. But again, Cook at the 11th pick here is a heck of a value for me. I did mention he's only played 14 games or fewer in each of his NFL seasons, but there's a lot to like here. I'm confident in this Vikings offense, despite the fact that Kirk Cousins is not an elite NFL quarterback. He is more than capable of getting the job done, and he's had some teams with high offensive finishes in terms of their productivity in a given season, whether that was with Washington or now in Minnesota. And then you've got 3 receivers I feel very comfortable with to complement Cook in the passing game. And I think that just as a running back, Dalvin is such a fantastic player. So I saw an interesting stat that if you remove Dalvin Cook's rookie season where he only caught 11 passes, in all of the seasons since, he's averaged 43 receptions per year, which is a pretty dang good number to be at for a guy who is really a pure running back and a true efficient and explosive runner of the football. And again, Minnesota is not nearly as extreme as Tennessee is, but this is still the offensive identity of their football team. They are a run-first offense now. This is not your Mike Zimmer Vikings anymore, but I think that Kevin O'Connell will value the run game very highly and lean on one of his best offensive playmakers, and they actually have been experimenting at OTAs with him lined out wide or in the slot a bit more as a receiving threat, which I think could just add more to his efficiency and damage that he can do, and maybe go north of those 43 receptions per year that we've seen, again, every season except that rookie year removed. So Joe Mixon's my RB7 here. His ADP is 13.1. I think that Joe should be, he's right on the cusp of where I think he should be going. He's a fringe first-round pick for me, but he's definitely someone that I think that when you talk about players who kind of had great situations evolve last year. We weren't expecting the Bengals to explode into the offensive juggernaut that they were. I thought they would be very good offensively. I did not think they would make the Super Bowl. But we've seen how that evolution of Cincinnati's offense has burst Joe Mixon into the limelight of being a prominent workhorse fantasy football running back one, and a guy who week in and week out is going to give you fantastic volume to rely on and depend on. So again, you've got this offensive upside, something you'll hear me talk about a ton. If you've got a great quarterback, a great offensive line, great skill position players, I'm very confident that you're going to be able to walk down the field and score a lot of points. Whereas if you are struggling, even if you're a great quarterback but don't have great weapons to work with, you're going to have some cogs in the work, and you're going to have some struggles to be an efficient team. I love teams that can keep their offense moving, get many and multiple scoring opportunities per game. And at the end of the day, I think that that's how Joe Mixon finally kind of erupted into his best fantasy football finish, and that being with the Bengals in 2021, where he was third in carries. So that goes back to the volume and being a pure workhorse. They are handing him the football a ton. Mind you, he also had a terrible offensive line a season ago, which has been addressed this offseason and gotten noticeably better. I would not say that they are, maybe they're just average at best, but average at best is still better than their bottom offensive line from a season ago. And then you've got a guy who's fifth in red zone touches. So where that goes back to is the pre-Joe Burrow Bengals could not move the football. You got Andy Dalton out here, the red rifle, throwing picks left and right to the other team. And now with Joe Burrow, you've got a downfield passing game. You've got a elevated ceiling for the offense's production total or production potential. And you've got a running back who is a workhorse, and once you get in the red zone, is seeing a healthy amount of touches and opportunities to punch the ball in for 6. So all things I love to see here. The reason, and that situational reason being the difference for me between why Joe Mixon's my RB7 and why Najee Harris is my RB8, despite having an ADP at the 8.5 overall pick. Now, my biggest concern with Najee Harris is quarterback play. And yes, if you want to argue that Najee Harris is going to lead the NFL in touches again this season, I want to argue with you. I think that that's a very realistic expectation. This dude is going to be fed the rock. He's going to catch a lot of passes out of the backfield, and he's going to see a ton of work on the ground. However, there is a breaking point, and I worry that they're going to lean on him so much to an extent that maybe injuries pop up, maybe they don't. Again, I'm not going to try and act like I'm some player health prophet out here. But what I will tell you is there are red flags. Derrick Henry eventually reached his breaking point. Najee Harris is a heck of a lot younger. He can certainly stand up to it. Rumor has it that he's 244 pounds coming into Steelers OTA. But I worry about the chemistry of this offense. If the team starts with Mitch Trubisky week 1 and by week 4 or 6 we're on to Kenny Pickett, how much of a respectable passing game will there be to distract the defense and at least keep them balanced? I don't know. Again, I think Najee is going to see a ton of volume, but will he be getting those valuable touches? Yes, when they get to the red zone, I'm sure he'll get goal line carries and red zone touches. But how frequently will they get to the red zone? How frequently will they get there in shorter drives, meaning that like last season, Big Ben's out here throwing 14 passes a drive because they're 3 yards in front of the line of scrimmage, and they're just having to just keep swinging and swinging and swinging to get down the field. And it's honestly painfully slow to watch Steelers games because when they run offense, they're literally getting 3 to 4 yards a clip and marching all the way down the field very, very slowly. The games take forever because of all the incomplete passes, and it's just a total disaster. So, again, if we're talking full PPR here, which I base pretty much all my rankings on half PPR scoring, yes, I do think that Najee Harris is still a solidified RB1, but I just question if he has the same ceiling as some of these other players because of his offense's ability to support him and give him an opportunity to succeed in that role. Alvin Kamara is my RB9 for this season. His ADP is 20.8. Now, I think, I don't know exactly what's going on in the minds of every fantasy player out there, but I think that the legal issues are still factored into his draft price here because we don't have an official verdict right now on exactly what's going to happen. Or as far as disciplinary measures go. Now, one of the names I really wanted to talk about today, spoiler alert, he's not in today's video, is Aaron Jones. If Alvin Kamara gets suspended, goodbye, AK, insert Aaron Jones. I love him. I think that his ability to be efficient in the pass-catching game is going to be ever so evident this season. And if you look at his numbers without Devontae Adams on the field and his late second-round ADP, smash the draft button again, scoop that up every single time. I think that he's going to do phenomenal things in that Packers offense. Again, he's never been a guy who's been too much of a workhorse, but that's a topic for another video and another discussion. So, Alvin Kamara here, if all charges are dismissed, if he's not facing any repercussions or seeing any disciplinary action taken against him, he belongs in the top 10. If not, again, move him out of here. But as a player, he's too good for me to rank him outside the spot right now. I'll take the draft value all day, every day. I'm not going to draft him 100% of the time at this draft spot, but he is a guy I feel very comfortable with right now, but I will kind of hedge my bet, if you will, and take him, 50-50 just because, again, we don't have that final ruling yet. But the skill set is there. The situation is there. I would argue that the Saints have improved offensively and added more complementary pieces to Alvin Kamara from last season, where it was his first year without Drew Brees. It was a season where he had a quarterback carousel all year long, and his touchdowns were more than split in half. He saw more than a 50% regression in touchdowns. He went from 21 in the 2020 season where he finished as the RB1 in PPR, and now he had just 9 a season ago. Now, he did have some knee aggravation and some nagging injuries that kind of hampered him for part of the year, but this is a guy who, again, has never had 1,000 rushing yards in a season, but has been so freaking dominant as a pass catcher that he's been able to have phenomenal fantasy finishes. And even last season, I was shocked when I read this stat when I was looking deeper into the numbers, but he was number 1 in running back target share. That doesn't mean he led all running backs in targets, but of the amount of passes the New Orleans Saints threw last season, Alvin Kamara had a 20% target share of the Saints offense, which is phenomenal. That means that every 1 in 5 passes that were thrown were going to Alvin Kamara. And when he gets those passes out in space, this is something I talked about a ton last season. He's efficient. He's going to get out there. He's going to avoid a big hit, and he's going to get out of bounds. And he's going to have more space between himself and any potential tacklers at the point of catching the ball, as opposed to running straight into the fire with an inside zone or halfback dive type play. So I think that his skill set is phenomenally complementary to fantasy football. But again, it's going to come down to that legal stuff, and we'll just have to play that by ear and see what happens there. The last name we're going to talk about today is Playoff Leonard Fournette. His ADP is 22.1, so just a pick or so behind Alvin Kamara here. The things he did last season were very underrated, and he was absolutely, he was banged up down the stretch of last season, but when he was out there, he was a week-winning player. This is a guy who is getting incredibly valuable touches in an offense that had fantastic productivity In terms of the Tampa Bay offense, I believe they were ranked number 3 in the NFL last season. So he was 3rd in running back targets with 84. And part of this goes to the fact that Ronald Jones was basically doghoused. So it became Leonard Fournette's workhorse, go crazy type of a situation in that backfield. Gio Bernard got nicked up as well. So you were seeing, again, 84 targets, number 3 at the running back position. Go to Leonard Fournette, and if you know anything about Tom Brady, he's going to feed his lead pass-catching back a lot of targets out of the backfield. Just, look at James White or any of the other 10 guys that he's worked with since 2000. And then you've got a guy who is 3rd in red zone touches with 54. So not only are you getting me touches inside the 20-yard line that have a better chance statistically of scoring a touchdown, getting me 6 points at least on that one play, you're also getting me a high volume of work in the passing game, which again is a more efficient way of touching the football. That's going to get you more fantasy points per target than it will per rushing attempt. And you've got a guy who broke the double-digit touchdown marker. Now, he only had 10, but that's still better than single digits. And there could potentially be room for improvement. So unless Tom Brady hits the wall and just falls off a cliff here, which is something I am not going to predict, I actually, love watching Tom Brady play, so I hope that he plays at a very high level again this season. But if it's business as usual for this Tampa Bay offense in year 3 with TB12, look out. Leonard Fournette seeing his ADP about as high as it's ever been since he was the lead back for the Jacksonville Jaguars earlier in his career, and I think it's very warranted. So those are my top 10 fantasy running backs at this point in time. It is very early in the month of June right now, so I'll be updating this list for sure, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed today's episode. Also, go check out Underdog Fantasy. Promo code SFS will get you free access to the draft guide. When you deposit, they will double your money. And I'll be dropping invite links to drafts throughout this offseason in the community Discord server. We can hop in a league together, play with something on the line throughout this season. Have a great time. And again, that's Underdog Fantasy, promo code SFS. So go check all that stuff out, guys. I will see you tomorrow. Peace out.